The Philippines Sea. 4:22 a.m. Friday. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group had been operating in the Philippine Sea for 19 days when the contact first appeared. Not a clear contact, an intermittent one. A passive sonar return on the hull-mounted AN/SQS-53D sonar of the guided missile destroyer USS Ramage that had appeared at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, faded at 11:49 p.m., and reappeared at 11:52 p.m. with a slightly different bearing. The return was classified by the system's automated detection algorithm as a possible biological contact, whale or large marine mammal, with a confidence level of 62%. The Ramage's sonar operator, a third-class petty officer with 11 months in the rating, logged the contact as biological and continued his watch. At 12:14 a.m. Friday, a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft from Patrol Squadron 16, operating on its scheduled overnight anti-submarine warfare patrol track, 180 miles east of the Ford's operating position, detected an anomalous acoustic return on one of its sonobuoy fields that it had deployed 6 hours earlier. The return was brief, 4 seconds of narrowband acoustic data on a frequency consistent with a submarine's reactor coolant pump harmonic before the contact went silent. The P-8A's acoustic sensor operator classified the contact as a probable submarine at 12:16 a.m. and transmitted a contact report to the Ford's Strike Group Command at 12:18 a.m. The Ford's anti-submarine warfare coordinator received the contact report at 12:19 a.m. She cross-referenced it against the Ramage's biological contact log from 11:47 p.m. The bearings from the two contacts, the Ramage's visual sonar return and the P-8A's acoustic detection, were not inconsistent with a single submarine contact that had been moving northwest at a speed consistent with 6 to 8 knots between the two detection events. Not conclusive, but not a coincidence she was comfortable attributing to biology. She initiated a deliberate search at 12:21 a.m., vectoring the P-8A to a new sonobuoy deployment pattern centered on the probable contact position and directing the Ford's escort screen to modify its ASW patrol assignments to increase coverage density in the northwestern quadrant. What the anti-submarine warfare coordinator did not know at 12:21 a.m., and what would not be established until the post-incident analysis completed 3 weeks later, was that the submarine she had begun searching for had been in the Ford Strike Group's general operating area for 6 days. The plan type 093, Shang-class nuclear attack submarine, had been stationed in a holding position 140 miles northwest of the Ford's operating area since the Taiwan Strait tension had elevated 11 days earlier. Its commander had been tracking the Carrier Strike Group's movement patterns, conducting daily passive acoustic collection runs at periscope depth to update his targeting data, and maintaining strict acoustic discipline. No active sonar, no unnecessary machinery operation, no maneuvers that would generate transient noise above the ambient background. The Type 093's commander was operating within a tactical doctrine the plan had refined over 14 years of studying U.S. Carrier Strike Group ASW operations. The doctrine identified 3 predictable ASW coverage gaps that Carrier Strike Groups generated during normal operations. The transition period when an ASW helicopter patrol was relieving its predecessor on station, the period immediately after a carrier completed a flight operations cycle when the escort screen's configuration changed to support logistics recovery, and the window that opened when a detached escort was sent to investigate a surface contact that had been assessed as non-threatening. The third gap was the most predictable and reliable. The carrier's commanding admiral was obligated under standing maritime safety protocols to investigate unidentified surface contacts in his operating area, and the detachment of a destroyer to investigate typically created a predictable western or eastern approach corridor reduction depending on the contact's bearing. The submarine's commander had been monitoring the carrier's response patterns for 6 days. He had identified the Hudner's detachment pattern 3 times in that period. He was waiting for the 4th. He had been waiting for an approach geometry that would place his submarine between the carrier and its primary ASW escorts in a position where his U-6 heavyweight torpedoes could reach the carrier before the carrier's defenses could respond. The U-6 is China's most capable heavyweight torpedo, a 533mm weapon with a 40-kilometer effective range, active and passive homing guidance, wake homing terminal approach, and a 300-kilogram warhead. At 50 knots, it covers a kilometer every 72 seconds. At 17 miles, it would reach the Ford's position in approximately 19 minutes, a window that the plan's planning doctrine assessed as sufficient for a carrier to have no effective kinetic response option without dedicated anti-torpedo defense systems. The Type 093's commander had studied the Ford's anti-torpedo defensive capability from classified intelligence assessments. He had not been given current information about the P-8A's sonobuoy deployment status at 12:31 a.m. At 3:44 a.m., the submarine's commander assessed that he had found his window. The Ford's operating position had drifted northwest during the preceding hour of flight operations. The carrier's course was constrained by wind direction during launch and recovery cycles. The ramage had moved to provide plane guard position northeast of the carrier. The USS Thomas Hudner, a destroyer that had been the Western escort, had been detached at 2:30 a.m. to investigate a surface contact 40 miles to the southwest that had turned out to be a commercial fishing vessel. For 11 minutes between 3:44 a.m. and 3:55 a.m., the approach corridor between the Type 093's holding position and the Ford's operating position had a density of active ASW sensors lower than at any previous point in the 6 days of observation. 11 minutes. The submarine's commander ordered an approach at 3:44 a.m. The Type 093 accelerated from its holding position at 4 knots to 14 knots on a heading of 127 degrees southeast toward the carrier's position. The increase in speed generated propulsion noise, not much. The Type 093's acoustic signature at 14 knots was significantly better than older planned submarines and was, in the commander's assessment, within the ambient noise floor of the Philippine Sea at that hour. It was not within the detection threshold of the new sonobuoy pattern the P-8A had deployed at 12:31 a.m. At 4:19 a.m., Sonobuoy Hotel 7 in the P-8A's deployed field registered a broadband acoustic contact on bearing 291 degrees, range estimated at 14 to 22 miles. The contact's frequency profile was inconsistent with biological sources and consistent with a submarine proceeding at 12 to 16 knots. The P-8A's acoustic sensor operator classified it as a definite submarine contact at 4:20 a.m. The P-8A's mission commander transmitted a flash priority contact report to the Ford and to Commander, Submarine Force Pacific, at 4:21 a.m. The submarine was real. It was moving toward the carrier. It was 14 to 22 miles away. Flight time for a U-6 torpedo at 50 knots, between 16 and 27 minutes, depending on exact range. The anti-submarine warfare coordinator on the Ford received the report at 4:21 a.m. 1 minute later, at 4:22 a.m., she had already transmitted 3 simultaneous orders. An immediate course change for the carrier to increase its distance from the contact's estimated position, the activation of the Ford's hull-mounted SQS-53D sonar in active mode, and the launch authorization for 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters from the carrier's own ASW detachment. The response had begun. The 11-minute window the submarine commander had identified was closing from both ends simultaneously. The Ford's active sonar activated at 4:22 a.m. The ping propagated outward through the Philippine Sea at 1,500 meters per second. The return from a solid object at 17 miles came back 23 seconds later. not perfectly resolved. The active sonar return from a submarine at 17 miles in the ambient acoustic environment of the Philippine Sea is not the sharp, clean contact of sonar training videos. It is a pattern of returns that trained operators interpret against a baseline of oceanographic knowledge. The Ford sonar operator had been in the rating for 3 years. The return at bearing 287 degrees, 17.3 miles, was not ambiguous to him. He reported it at 4:23 a.m. At 4:23 a.m., the contact was established. The submarine knew it was established. The Ford's active sonar ping at 4:22 a.m. had been detectable by the Type 093's passive sonar from the moment it arrived. The submarine's commander knew that the carrier had detected him. He had 14 seconds to decide. His approach had been detected at approximately 17 miles from the carrier. His U-6 torpedoes had an effective range of 45 kilometers. He was within weapons range. He had a targeting solution that had been maintained and updated for 6 days. The carrier was in his weapons basket. He ordered torpedo launch at 4:23 a.m. 2 U-6 heavyweight torpedoes left the Type 093's forward tubes at 4:23 a.m., set for active homing mode at 50 knots. Time from launch to the carrier's position at 17 miles, approximately 19 minutes. At 4:23 a.m., the anti-submarine warfare coordinator on the Ford was processing the active sonar contact report when the passive sonar operator on the USS Ramage, now 22 miles northeast of the carrier, reported transient noise on bearing 271 degrees consistent with torpedo tube outer door opening. At 4:24 a.m., the Ramage's sonar reported 2 active homing torpedo signatures inbound, bearing 271 degrees, approximate range 18 miles. The 2 detections, tube transient and active pinger, confirmed what the active sonar return had established. The contact was real, it was a submarine, and it had fired. 19 minutes. The Ford began its emergency evasion maneuver at 4:24 a.m. Maximum speed, course change to open the range from the torpedo approach bearing, and the activation of the AN/SLQ-25 Nixie torpedo decoy system, which streamed a towed acoustic decoy from the carrier's stern to create a false acoustic target for the U-6's homing seeker. The Nixie was not a guaranteed solution. The U-6 in active homing mode used a combination of its own active sonar and wake homing guidance, sensing the carrier's propeller wake, that made it resistant to simple acoustic decoys. The Nixie would complicate the torpedo's targeting solution. It would not necessarily defeat it. The P-8A dropped its first Mark 54 lightweight torpedo at 4:24 a.m. from a position 12 miles southeast of the submarine contact. The Mark 54 entered the water at 4:24 a.m. and began its acquisition spiral. The Type 093 was maneuvering, accelerating, changing depth, attempting to open the range from the carrier to create a more defensible position. The Mark 54's active sonar pinged on the first acquisition spiral and registered a return from the submarine at 4:26 a.m. The torpedo homed. The Type 093's commander ordered a decoy deployment and an emergency dive to maximum depth at 4:26 a.m. The decoy, an acoustic emitter designed to replicate the submarine's own acoustic signature, was launched from the submarine's signal ejector at 4:26 a.m. The Mark 54 seeker evaluated the 2 returns, the submarine and the decoy, at 4:26 a.m. and guided toward the larger acoustic target. The decoy was smaller, the submarine was larger. The Mark 54 guided toward the submarine. At 4:27 a.m., the torpedo detonated against the Type 093's hull on the port side aft of the sail. The detonation was not sufficient to sink the submarine. The Mark 54 is a lightweight torpedo, and the Type 093's pressure hull, while damaged, remained intact. But the detonation ruptured the submarine's propulsion shaft seal, flooded the engine room, and rendered the submarine incapable of controlled maneuvering or further torpedo employment. The Type 093 was non-functional as a weapons platform at 4:27 a.m. Its two U-6 torpedoes were still in the water at 4:27 a.m., 3 minutes after the U-6 launch and 16 minutes before the torpedoes would reach the Ford's position at their current speed. Both MH-60R helicopters from the Ford's ASW detachment were in the air. The first had launched at 4:24 a.m., the second at 4:25 a.m. Each carried two Mk-54 torpedoes and an AN/AQS-22 airborne low-frequency sonar system. Their mission at 4:27 a.m. shifted from prosecuting the submarine, the P-8A's Mark 54 had addressed that, to intercepting the U-6 torpedoes. Torpedo intercept using aircraft-dropped lightweight torpedoes is a doctrine the U.S. Navy had developed specifically for the scenario of inbound heavyweight torpedoes, when a carrier has insufficient time for other countermeasures. The doctrine is mathematically demanding. The MH-60R must locate an inbound torpedo, a fast, deep-running weapon that generates a specific acoustic signature. With its dipping sonar, then position its own Mark 54 ahead of the inbound torpedo's track to achieve an intercept. The geometry requires placing the Mark 54 in the water in front of the inbound weapon, with enough offset that the Mark 54's own acquisition spiral can lock onto the U-6 before the U-6 passes the drop point. The first MH-60R's dipping sonar acquired the lead U-6 torpedo at 4:28 a.m., bearing 287 degrees from the carrier, range 13 miles, speed approximately 50 knots. The crew calculated the intercept geometry in 43 seconds. At 4:29 a.m., the first Mk-54 was in the water, dropped ahead, and offset from the YU-6's computed track. The Mk-54 began its acquisition spiral at 4:29 a.m. At 4:30 a.m., the Mk-54's seeker acquired the inbound U-6 on its second acquisition arc. The two weapons were on converging courses. At 4:30 a.m., the Mk-54 intercepted the U-6 at 9 miles from the Ford. The U-6's warhead detonated on contact. The detonation was visible from the Ford's bridge as a brief white flash below the water's surface to the northwest. A 533mm torpedo warhead detonating at depth. The carrier's crew on the bridge watch had been watching the bearing for 7 minutes. The flash was not a surprise. The relief was, the second U-6 torpedo was acquired by the second MH-60R's dipping sonar at 4:29 a.m. The intercept geometry was more difficult. The second U-6 had been running a slightly offset course from the first, placing it 800 meters south of the first torpedo's track. The MH-60R crew recalculated. At 4:31 a.m., their second Mk-54 was in the water. At 4:33 a.m., the Mk-54 acquired the YU-6. The intercept occurred at 4:34 a.m., 6.4 miles from the Ford. The second flash was larger than the first. The shorter intercept range meant less water depth at detonation, and the pressure wave reached the Ford's hull as a mild shudder that the carrier's commanding officer felt through the deck. At 4:34 a.m., 11 minutes after the U-6 launch and 12 minutes before the torpedoes would otherwise have reached the Ford, both inbound torpedoes had been intercepted. The carrier had maneuvered to a range of 21 miles from the original contact position, its Nixie still streaming, its hull-mounted sonar in active mode, its screen reconfigured with the ramage closing from the northeast, and the Sudner ordered back from its detached position to the southwest. The Type 093 was on the surface at 4:41 a.m., its crew initiating emergency flooding control procedures, transmitting a distress signal on the International Maritime Emergency Frequency. The submarine was not sinking. Its pressure hull damage was severe, but survivable with damage control. 3 crew members had been injured in the engine room flooding. The submarine's commander transmitted his vessel's distress status at 4. 10:42 a.m. A plan rescue surface vessel was dispatched from Joshan Naval Base at 4:51 a.m. The USS Ramage closed to 3 miles of the distressed submarine at 4:45 a.m. and offered medical assistance on the International Maritime Emergency Channel. The offer was not accepted. The Ramage maintained its position and continued documenting the Type 093's status with its own sensor systems throughout the submarine's surface period. The documentation was comprehensive and transmitted in real time to Naval Forces Pacific Headquarters. The P-8A, now low on fuel, was relieved by a second P-8A that arrived on station at 5:12 a.m. and took over continuous surveillance of the submarine until the plan rescue vessel arrived at 9:44 a.m. Time from first suspicious contact to definite contact. Established 4 hours and 1 minute. Time from torpedo launch detection to first P-8A, Mark 54 in water. 1 minute. Time from torpedo launch to both torpedoes intercepted. 11 minutes. Time from torpedo launch to Type 093, non-functional, 4 minutes. Distance of closest U-6 torpedo approach to Ford, 6.4 miles. U.S. munitions expended, 1 Mark 54, P-8A, submarine prosecution, 2 Mk-54, MH-60R, torpedo intercept. Total, 3 Mk-54 torpedoes at approximately $870,000 each. Total U.S. munitions cost, $2.61 million. USS Gerald R. Ford damage, 0. Ford personnel injured, 0. Planned submarine crew injured, 3. In engine room flooding. Type 093 status, non-functional as weapons platform, surfaced, awaiting rescue. U-6 torpedoes intercepted, 2 of 2. The Type 093's commander had correctly identified his window. 11 minutes of reduced ASW coverage density in the northwestern approach corridor. He had exploited it with professional competence. 6 days of acoustic collection, disciplined approach, maintained targeting solution, well-timed torpedo launch within the carrier's weapons basket. The window had been real. The exploitation had been technically correct. What he had not factored with sufficient weight was the P-8A's sonobuoy field that had been deployed at 12:31 a.m., 3.5 hours before his approach, specifically because his contact had been logged as possible and not dismissed as biological. The Anti-Submarine Warfare Coordinator's decision at 12:21 a.m. to initiate a deliberate search rather than accept the biological classification had been the decision that closed the window before the submarine reached it. The decision had required no special authority, no additional assets, no escalation of any kind. It had required a coordinator who wasn't comfortable with coincidences and who had the professional judgment to recognize that 2 data points from different sensors, imperfect and ambiguous in isolation, produced a pattern that warranted action when placed together. The third-class petty officer who had logged the 11:47 p.m. biological contact, rather than ignoring it, had contributed to that decision. So had the P-8A acoustic sensor operator who had classified the 12:14 a.m. contact as a probable submarine rather than ambient noise. Both had made the minimum defensible call rather than the easiest one. The window had been 11 minutes long. The search had been running for 3 hours and 51 minutes when the submarine moved into it. The torpedo intercept had followed the launch by 11 minutes and 3 hours and 51 minutes. The gap between what the submarine's commander had identified as his opportunity and what the carrier's anti-submarine warfare team had been doing while he waited for it. The mathematics of the engagement had been determined at 12:21 a.m., before the submarine fired a single weapon, when 3 separate individuals, a petty officer, an acoustic sensor operator, and an ASW coordinator, had each made the same decision. Treat the ambiguous data as real until proven otherwise. The submarine's commander had identified his window with precision. He had not known that the window had been occupied for hours before he arrived at it.